Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review. What's up guys, Dave here from Metal Epidemic, back with another album review. And for this review, Duncan Kyle and I have been checking out the new album from avant-garde metal band Catafalque. The band's new album Vadak will be released on June 25th via Season of Mist Records. So this is one of those bands that I'd heard of, but never actually listened to them. And the more I kind of read about the band and the kind of backstory, the more I was kind of intrigued to hear this new album. They originally emerged as a black metal band, founded by singer, keyboard player Tomas Katai. He worked with kind of various members for the first 4 albums of their career. And then on album number 5, Tomas went solo with the kind of help of some guest musicians. And he's pretty much continued down that path, kind of blending various styles and working with different guests on each release. For this album, this is album number 10. Again, there are around, according to the press release, about 15 or 16 guests contributing to this album in the form of kind of vocals, lead guitar, acoustic guitar, saxophone, trumpet, percussion, red pipes. There's a whole load of stuff on this album that's been brought in by other musicians. So Vadak, meaning wildlings in Hungarian. The album title is a deliberate clue to the exotic and feral existence of Vadak. Like seedlings scattered throughout the forest by the mere forces of nature, thy Catafalque's imaginative sound grows with an organic sense of whimsy cultivated within the vast influences of our megacosm. Thematically, Vadak is a foreboding lesson in mortality. Emphasising the fragility that is shared by man and beast alike, the record explores our Freudian life instincts, which we inherently fear and run from the ultimate goal of existence, death. Okay, so where to start with this one? I although I was interested to hear the album, there was also a part of me that had reservations about it as well. And that's mainly just down to the styles that are involved in this album. I'll put it out there, I am not the biggest avant-garde fan. But
I can hear swaths of the internet gasping in shock right now. No, I can just hear people going, he's death metal Dave isn't a fan of avant-garde.
Well,
scandal.
Yeah,
no, you're
depends,
not. You're not. It's like, you like bits, but
there's bits. And when you say death metal, avant-garde death metal, I can kind of get on board with.
Yep.
This was a bit different. But as I said, there's been a bit of a buzz about this album online, so I thought it was going to be interesting to talk about anyway. Stylistically, this is as varied as it gets, really, to be honest. Even after listening to this like multiple times, I can't say this sounds like anyone else. There are individual elements that have similarities to other bands, but I couldn't think of anyone that really incorporates all of these styles into one. No particular band came to mind. Here we've got pretty much like elements of kind of dark retro synth work. We've got that blended with kind of various tones of extreme metal, from death metal to black metal. There's a definite kind of Celtic or kind of folk essence on individual tracks. There's a bit of jazz, there's a wee bit of industrial, and there's kind of some straight up metal on there as well. And I think because of that, and the fact that this is like 10 tracks, over an hour long, it did take a bit of time to digest this. Like my first listen, I got to the end, I was just like, where did I even begin with this? So like it took me a few listens to kind of start to kind of dissect it a bit. And from what I could tell, listening to the album, it didn't really follow any particular formula. It obviously has a theme, as I mentioned, the kind of life progressing into death, but that didn't seem to have much of an impact on the kind of structure of the album that I could really tell anyway. But to be honest, there was so much going on these 10 tracks that like song structure was like the last thing on my mind, to be honest. This is a very eclectic bunch of tracks, very experimental. Each track kind of sounds like its own thing. Individually they sound pretty unique stylistically and like structurally. The only kind of one thing that you could argue held them together thematically was the retro kind of synth sounds, which appeared on like more than a handful of the tracks on the album. There's also very little in the way of vocals on this album, and when they do appear, they don't tend to last for the entire track. They felt to me very much like an instrument rather than a kind of focal point or like offering something lyrically on these tracks. There also has varied as the styles on this album as well, going from that kind of extreme like kind of blackened style on tracks like Zarvis, and then the more kind of folky and psychedelic on the kind of title track. I think there's a lot to offer on this release. That it's probably going to be one that people will react to differently. Just with the sheer amount of styles on this album, there'll be stuff that people will gravitate to. For me, that was the kind of heavier moments where they delved into the kind of deathy, kind of blackened territory on tracks like Gombok, or the other track was Molo. And also those kind of 80s synthy, kind of sci-fi sounding elements that are woven through the album. That was the other thing that I really enjoyed about this. On the flip side of that, I really struggled with the more kind of like folky, psychedelic, kind of abstract parts of this. As I said, I'm not the biggest avant-garde fan. And when it goes down that really kind of like eccentric rabbit hole on Vadak, I'll be completely honest, I started to switch off. There was so much going on, and at times I felt there was like too much going on and too much added to the melting pot. It's well performed musically, but for me it felt kind of overstuffed with ideas and instrumentation. There was certain moments on the album that I kind of couldn't wait for the track to end. And when some of those tracks are like 12 minutes long, that felt like an entirety. The last track though, Zuzmara, I think it is, that's stunning. I could totally imagine that track on like a movie soundtrack or something like that. It's nothing like the rest of the album. It's more stripped back and has a more kind of structured feel, but it's beautifully put together. I really enjoyed the last track. As much as this really wasn't my kind of jam overall, I have to give props to Tomas for kind of pulling this all together. It can't have been a kind of easy task involving that many instruments and guest musicians. I can't imagine trying to plan all this out and like then try and make it sound consistent throughout the album. So well done on that front. Even though like some of the production choices weren't to my taste, I wasn't a kind of huge fan of the drum sound. It was quite kind of flat, very kind of lifeless for me. And as for the actual album, musically, yeah, it's just not quite my tempo, shall we say. In terms of the musicianship, I can't really fault it. I mean, the quality of musicians are great. The guests that you had did a really good job, and Tomas has done a great job pulling it all together. For me personally, though, I just felt like it was too kind of fragmented. There's just too much going on, and I didn't necessarily think that it all worked together. Pieces of it I liked, as I mentioned, but it's not an album that I can see myself kind of going back to at all this year, unfortunately. Duncan, what did you make of Vadak?
It's an interesting one because I think you've hit on a couple of things which, just thinking about now in hindsight, I think would elevate a lot of this. To me now, just hearing you speak, what this is missing is a visual component. See, if this is done as an audio-visual project, I think those moments where it really transcends and goes off specifically into the folk sections, if you have something visually that carries you through with that, I think you get something out of it, as opposed to the switch that they do several times. For the most part, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think I just acclimated to a lot of it a bit easier than you did. That speaks a lot to some of my tastes. I don't mind stuff being a bit more kind of pagan-y and folksy. I love all that dark synthwave shit. I mean, that's my bag. So when they started doing elements of that, it came in, it sounded a little bit like Night Satan meets John Carpenter, but in a weird way. I loved that when it came in. The front half of the album has the heavier stuff in it, And then the back half of the album has heavier elements, but they're usually in smaller sections, and that's where you get these huge soundscapes. And I think that is maybe to its detriment. I think it's front-loaded in such a way that the songs are a bit shorter at the, kind of first half. And like I say, they tend to err on the heavier side of things, whether it's use of instrumentation. That's not to say that it's all heavy. Like track number 2 opens with like a very clean female vocal. But what I found when listening to it for the second time, I only did it twice purely because of the length, was that I could calculate exactly where my interest started to fall off. And it was after about track 5 that I could feel myself. A certain bit would come in, some brass section would come in. I'd be like, oh, that's a kind of cool element. But it was more picking out the elements I liked rather than necessarily saying it adds to the song. And that's where, when you were talking about the final track, and I would totally agree, the final track would sit great on a soundtrack. It started making me think there, if there was a visual component with this, if you had an hour visual component and that music weaving through, whether it's nature or whatnot, you've got the kind of dual thing of marrying the sound to the visual. I think because you don't have that, avant-garde music usually works best in a live setting, and it usually works best in a live setting because there's something to see. And it has to work in that. On a CD alone, I find at times it can be... You can't always pick out exactly what the musician or musicians are aiming for. Especially when you read that kind of the biog for it, where they're talking about like Freud and, like the existential questions of life and death. That's words on a page, and I don't necessarily feel I get that from the music that they have, but with an environment where you can link that up, it works. Production I enjoyed overall. The musicianship is great. I mean, you can't fault it. Like, I think even composition, even when it moved into bits that I wasn't interested in, when they do the folk stuff sounds great. When they do the metal stuff sounds great. So like composition wise, I sometimes felt they were maybe trying one too many elements. Maybe, especially when you've got a 12-minute track. Does it all need to be in that 12-minute track? Does that track need to be 12 minutes? Like, these are questions I ask myself listening to this. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent here for sure. Like I say, I just don't necessarily think all works together as an album, unless I'd be interested if there was a live performance of this. With these streaming live performances, I'd be interested to check it out just to see if that does add an element, or if they do a music video to one of their longer tracks, checking that out to see if that works. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot that I enjoyed on it. I just, when we use the term album, I don't necessarily think it has the flow or is cohesively interesting to me to merit its full length in the amount of tracks. So,
okay. Fair enough. Kyle?
I hate this thing. I'm not gonna lie, this was terrible in every way. It had like a few redeeming heavy qualities, like they can do the metal thing since they come from black metal, but even black metal's not my favorite genre, so I'm like, really? Come on. It sounded like a collection of a 15-year-old's terrible demos written on a cheap Casio, and they didn't really expand further than that. You'd think at a band with 6 albums or something in, they'd invest in some good drum libraries. They didn't use real button drums, and they didn't use real bass. It's fake bass, and I'm like, a bass costs like $100, €100. Where is this band from? I don't remember. Just go and buy one. If you can play guitar, you can play a fucking bass. I mean, you can at least fake it.
I think the main guy's Hungarian, I think, as far as I know.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay, €100.
Although, I did read somewhere that he lived in Edinburgh for a while.
It's not the worst place to live. It's probably better than Hungary, based only on what I've heard from this album. I don't know. It was just like, when they did the things, it was like, okay, they can do the metal bit, and it just felt like if they came up with this stuff, and he was like, well, if I just slap the label avant-garde on it, everyone will think I'm a fucking genius. And then he mentions Freud and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, none of that, just like Duncan said, none of that came through in the music at all. It sounded like fucking 17 hours of self-indulgent, pretentious shit, and I just absolutely cannot stand it. Nobody needs a 6-minute song of this. Nobody needs a 10-minute song of this. And nobody needs a 12-minute song of this, and all of those 3 things are present on this album, in quotation marks. Because it's not an album, it's a collection of noise. And when they do the separate elements, like the synth-wavy stuff, it's like, it's a synth, but he's just programmed an arpeggiator, and that's it. It's not gone any further than the basics for me. There's no adventure, there's nothing. It's just, oh, I can do all these things, but badly, and put them together kind of badly, and then bore everybody with my presence. It's like, I really think this dude should stop writing music and get a job doing some office thing and just not bother anymore. Honestly, this was awful in every way, except for the heavy little bits. That's his only redeeming quality. They were actually not bad.
You're literally, if you want dislikes on your video, you're literally describing what I think when people tell me that I should listen to Devin Townsend. So it's literally how I feel listening to the majority of his music. I'm like, that did we need that bit in there?
I'm not a huge fan of his either.
Could be maybe,
but at least he's talented.
Is he?
You can't say that he's not talented. He knows how to write a damn song, but these guys, they don't know how to write a song. They just put stuff together and hope it works. That's how it came across to me. It was just like, okay, there's no structure. There's no like thread through the whole album. There's just a collection of stuff.
I would agree. There is definitely not a thread throughout this album.
Yeah.
Like the theme that Dave described at the beginning, having listened to it twice, maybe I need to listen to it more, but it wasn't evident on the listen at all. So
No, absolutely not. No.
I think, me personally, I think maybe because there's such a large amount of musicians involved in this, may have something to do with that. Why it's kind of lost that fluidity a little bit. Because I think if it's written and performed by one guy or a group or a band that's been together for years, you can that comes across in the music, but.
I suppose it's his role in the band. If ultimately he is the band and he's in charge of the songs and the music and he's getting guest musicians in to play it, he's overall in charge of what those musicians are playing as the composer, essentially. As the one person, you're a composer. So if it doesn't all gel up and it goes different directions, that's either because he's taken his eye off the ball on that one, or he believes in a much more kind of free-formed, jazz-like approach to things, which, I mean, some jazz is great, some jazz is unlistenable, and the danger is generally when everyone goes off and does their own thing.
Okay, so ratings for this one from the Catafalque. I mean, musically, like from the kind of musician point of view, I can't really fault it. I mean, the guest musicians that he's brought in have done a good job. There's nothing that they've played that sounds kind of subpar or like sloppy. I think a lot of their performances are really good. And I think to bring all this together with this amount of musicians takes a bit of I don't know. Someone with good kind of planning skills to bring all this together. I don't think that the end product has necessarily worked for me anyway. It maybe just my tastes, but I don't know. I just didn't connect with it at all, and I had some issues with the production of it personally. I'd probably go in. I think I'm probably sitting about a 2 out of 5 on this one. Duncan, what are you thinking?
Marginally higher than yourself, much like I thought it would be. I'm a 2.5 out of 5.
2.5. Nice. And Kyle?
I agree. The guest musicians kind of saved this, what little there is to save. But even some of the lines, the guitar lines, were just, they weren't sloppily played, but they were sloppily written and just not inspiring at all. It was like 3 notes up and down half a scale, and I'm just like, oh, you know what? So I think for the first time this year, it's going to be a 1 out of 5 from me.
1 out of 5.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I'll ever listen to this ever again.
Fair enough. This one drops on June 25th on Season of Mist Records. If you want to check out the band, it's facebook.com/Thy Catafalque. I'll put a little link in the description to the Facebook and to the band's Bandcamp page so you can check out the album. Let us know what you think if you've heard it. Let us know your thoughts and opinions. I've got a feeling this one's going to be fairly kind of love it or hate it. I think they've obviously got a fan base. They're 10 albums in. So someone's obviously enjoying this stuff. Let us know what you think. Stick some comments in below. You all right, Kyle?
Yeah, sorry, I just choked on the number 10.
Yes. That's the review. Thanks for checking it out. Much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.